Forage crops. Introduction. One source of food nutrients to livestock is through provision of forage crops. Farmers therefore must be able to identify and classify various forage crops. Meaning of forage crops. Forage crops are crops grown for feeding livestock. Examples include Napier grass, lucerne, Congo signal, and edible canna. Lesson objectives. By the end of this topic, you should be able to define pastures, classify pastures, identify forage crops, describe the ecological requirements of forage crops, describe the establishment and management of pastures and fodder, and describe forage utilization and conservation. Background knowledge. In your previous studies, you covered the meaning of livestock nutrition and the sources of feed nutrients. Livestock nutrition is the feeding of livestock for different products and ages. Background. Suggested learning activities. Collect specimen of the common forage crops growing naturally or planted in the school farm and mount them in a practical book. Name each sample and describe the forage crop briefly. Grow forage crops which are suitable to the ecological condition within the school compound. Visit the nearby progressive farmers and find out the forage crops used to feed the livestock. Prepare and store hay using tripod method. Match each of the following vitamins to the respective functions by typing the correct vitamin to the respective box. Below is a list of pastures. Drag and drop each into the appropriate box. Below is a list of various methods of sowing in pasture establishment. Drag and drop each method in appropriate box. Fill in the blanks by typing the appropriate management practice corresponding to the statements given below by typing in. Below is a list of effects of either early or late defoliation. Drag and drop each one of them under the appropriate column. Below is a list of disadvantages of either zero grazing or continuous grazing. Drag and drop each one of them under appropriate column. Glossary. Carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the ability of a forage stand to maintain a particular number of livestock per unit area. Defoliation is the removal of top foliage in forage crops through grazing in pastures and through cutting in fodder. Digestibility. Digestibility is a portion of food retained in an animal's body after taking care of losses through urine, feces, and gases. Direct sowing. Direct sowing is the establishment of the pasture crop in a clean seedbed where no other crops are growing. Fodder crops are forage crops which are grown, allowed to mature, then cut and given to livestock as feed. Forage crops are crops grown for feeding livestock. Hay is a dehydrated forage having 15 to 20% moisture content or less. Legume seed inoculation is the application of nitroculture to seeds of legumes to help the legumes fix nitrogen. Mixed stand pasture is a mixture of grasses and pasture legumes growing together within the field. Oversowing is the establishment of pasture legume in an existing grass pasture. Paddock is a fenced portion of a pasture land in which animals are restricted for grazing. Pastures are forage crops which are grazed on directly by the livestock while still growing on the field. Pure stand pasture is a pasture made up of only grass or only legume growing within the field. Reseeding is a field management practice involving refilling of the gaps left where forage crops have died. Rotational grazing is the practice of allowing livestock to feed on a proportion of the pasture for a period of time until the pasture is down to the required level before they are moved to the next portion of pastures. Silage is a product of controlled anaerobic fermentation of green forage. Stocking rate is the number of livestock units maintained per unit area of land. Topping is the removal of stemmy fiber materials left over after a period of pasture grazing. Undersowing is the establishment of pasture under a cover crop. Zero grazing is a method of grazing where livestock are kept in permanent feeding enclosure known as stall, where there is provision of water and feeds. Pastures. Pastures are forage crops which are grazed on directly by the livestock while still growing on the field. Pasture crops do not easily get spoiled when grazed on directly by livestock. Classification of pasture crops. Pasture can be classified according to pasture stand, nature of pasture establishment, and ecological zones where the pasture crop is grown. According to pasture stand, there are two classes of pastures, namely pure stand pastures and mixed stand pastures. Natural pastures and artificial pastures are classes of pastures if classification is done according to the nature of pasture establishment. Forage conservation. Forage conservation is the utilization of forage crops without wastage. Conservation is only relevant to farmers who maintain proper stocking rate, since most of them tend to base their stocking rates on the amount of forage available during wet season. Forage can be conserved in form of silage, hay, or as standing forage. Conservation helps in distribution of available forage throughout the year and provision of feed for the dry season. It acts as a source of income when conserved forage is sold and ensures better utilization of land. Utilization of forage. The utilization depends on the requirement of the animal and forage materials available. The forage material should be properly prepared before feeding the animal to avoid wastage. The excess forage should be stored for the dry season or sold. Hay making. Hay is dehydrated forage having 15 to 20% moisture content or less. This method of forage conservation is mainly applicable to pasture grasses and legumes, for example, Rhodes grass or green leaf desmodium. Silage making. Silage making is the conservation of green forage as a product of controlled anaerobic fermentation. It is done in a structure known as silo, and the process is known as ensiling. Silage making aims at preserving the herbage with minimum loss of nutrients. It takes 2 to 3 weeks to complete the ensiling process. The ensiling process may require addition of additives to improve nutritive value of silage when forage having low amount of carbohydrates or having over 70% moisture are used for silage making. Qualities of a good silage. Several factors affect the nutritive value of forage and therefore its quality. This may include relative proportions of organic acids in the silage, compaction of ensiled materials, and the quality of forage used when making the silage. Qualities of a good silage include having in order of predominance lactic acid, succinic acid, and formic acid. Having pH value of 4.2 and below. Be greenish yellow in color. Be free from molds and of fine texture. And having 5 to 9% lactic acid. Fodder crops. Fodder crops are forage crops which are grown and allowed to mature and then cut and given to animals as a feed. Fodder crops easily get spoilt when fed on directly by livestock. Herbage production. Herbage production from fodder crops is higher per unit area of land than pastures. Farmers can get good amount of money if they produce, conserve, and sell fodder crops, especially in large-scale farming. Guidelines when calculating livestock nutrient requirements. The guidelines for calculating livestock nutrient requirements include: a cow averagely requires 3 kilograms of dry matter per 100 kilograms body weight per day. Silage has 40% dry matter. A cow should get only 50% of its daily dry matter requirements from silage, but the rest from other feeds, for example, fresh pastures. Silage density is approximately 500 kilograms per cubic meter. Using the above guidelines, a cow weighing 400 kilograms will therefore require on daily basis 400 kilograms divided by 100 kilograms